Good morning, I'm Angus at LabVac. Today up on the bench here I've got a Vacuubrand pump. This is an RZ6. This particular one is actually an RZ6W, the W standing for Worldwide Motor. This is a switchable motor unit, so you can go 110, 230 volt and the various bits and bobs around that. We're going to strip it down, clean it up, put it back together again with all new seals, see how we go. So first thing that I need to do, this has an oil mist filter fitted to it. So with a 19mm spanner, I'm going to unwind that bolt. Feels quite free, this one. So that comes off there. It's a banjo bolt arrangement there. There's an element inside there which I'll change later on. Get rid of that O-ring while I'm about it. All the O-rings that come out, everything that comes out, I'm just going to pile up. It's a good idea to hang on to them all until you've identified everything from the new kit that you're replacing, just in case there's anything that's not in there that you thought might be. Then I'm going to tip the pump up on end. Now the first peculiarity with Vacuubrand pumps, this applies to the smaller RZ2.5 and to this 6. It doesn't have a flanged on motor in the way we normally think. Normally I'd be undoing 4 bolts here, lifting the motor off. In this case you actually need to dismantle the motor in order to remove it. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Start by taking this fan cover off. There's 3 screws around there. The fan cover's plastic, and over years of heat cycling they will become brittle. So you just want to be cautious not to drop it or knock it about, because if you do shatter it, then that'll have to be replaced. So we'll get that out of the way, find it later. There's a lot of dust in here. Just going to give that a quick blow like that. And now I've got bits of dust all over the bench, which can get stuck in everything later on. And now we have these 3 tie rods, 1, 2, 1 down the bottom here. Now you do need a special tool to take these off. You can spend hours with a pair of pliers trying to grip these very small ends. What will happen is the pliers will just chew the ends up, and more than likely you'll destroy the heads and not get them undone. So you get these tools with a slot in there. These are specifically motor tie rod removal tools. They come in a kit. The 2.5 size of this pump uses a different size tool. It's a smaller tool. If you can't find these locally, do get in touch with me. We can supply them, or at least point you in a useful direction. All pumps, all motors used to use this type of tie rod, but most of them have gone over to sort of 8mm socket heads or thereabouts. You just want to undo those 3 tie rods and lift them out. There's a little spring washer on each one. Not hypercritical, but you do want to retain them if you can. So that's the tie rods out, which run right the way through here and hold the motor on. So the motor will now come apart. And there it goes. So what we've lifted off there is the motor stator with its windings and the shaft. And as you can see here, the drive into the pump is taken from here. So that couples up inside the pump onto the shaft inside. Now, once this is dismantled, you can't run this. So you can't run this on a bench because the pump itself is the front bearing on here. So there's not a lot that we can do with this until the pump is reassembled. If I just give that a light tap on there to release it, and we can take that out. So that's the iron core, that's the coupling into the pump. We'll need to give this a clean. There is a small ridge forming there where the shaft seal's cut into it, just because it should have been serviced a little bit sooner, but it's not in bad condition, so we'll get that cleaned up later. And again, I will move it out of the way along with the windings, which leaves us with our pump. Now, if you watched any of the other videos, why would you? If this is the pump you've got, this is the video you watch. But again, at this point, the base plate, we normally try to get rid of the base plate. This is one of the pumps where the base plate is cast into the body of the pump, so it's not removable. We can't do that. What we can do is take from the bottom here, there's a plate under here which has the felt pads underneath. These famous felt pads that I always seem to complain about. I just, in my humble opinion, think that if your pump started leaking, you ought to know about it. And having a felt pad there to catch the first 100 millilitres of oil that leaks out is only delaying the inevitable. So take that cover out of the way, and there are our felt pads. There are two in here, and these are dry, bone dry, so the shaft seal on this pump hasn't leaked. We've then got this black plastic plate here which sits between the motor and the pump, and again, the idea of this is if you do have oil leaks, they won't make their way past this plate and into the motor. Not that the motor would particularly care, they're not too worried about having a bit of oil in there, but it does keep the mess in one place. So there's an O-ring around there. That O-ring is completely static. It rarely needs to be replaced. It is in the kit, I think, so it can be replaced. And then we've got our outer shaft seal in a carrier here. So I'm going to take the 3 screws out of there, which are very tight. So there's 3 screws holding that down. Just going to give them a tap to free them up. Given how tight these are, I think the pumps probably run at a bit of an elevated temperature at some point. There we go. Apologies for having so much of me in shot so early on. So with those out, this plate is free to come off. As is the case here, they're often very stuck. There's an O-ring that seals it, and as with the screws, the temperature cycling sticks that down pretty well. So just with a very gentle leverage, you're levering against aluminium here, so you don't want to be putting a lot of pressure on that, but that's freed it off. So this is the carrier with our shaft seal inside it, and then there is an O-ring there that seals it. It's well and truly stuck down, but just free that off. I'll remove it over to the side, leaving our shaft seal. Now that needs to come out of the carrier. there's a number of ways to tackle that. The first would be this is a screwdriver that's had all the sharp ends ground off it. So if I can insert that between the seal and the carrier and twist it, yeah, that's worked well. The alternative to that, of course, would be to put a punch onto the seal from here and punch down on it to push that out. But that's come out fairly easily. So that's the actual shaft seal that's going to get replaced, and the carrier that's going to get cleaned up and reused. That's our first free part. Now underneath there is a small coupling which I will pick out with some tweezers so that you can see it. Give that a clean. So this is a small plastic coupling which you can see has these low type faces on each side. One of those slots into the end of the motor and one of them slots into a comparable position on the pump shaft. So there's the slot and that coupling sits inside like that, and the same on the other side. These couplings you sometimes find are broken. They're designed in that way. If the pump should seize up from overwork or damage or material jamming it up inside, the plastic coupling, being the weak part, is designed so that it will shear and disconnect the drive from the motor into the pump. So sometimes you'll see those broken, and that would be the reason. Provided you're able to free the pump up and get everything moving again, then you just put a new coupling in. It won't be part of the kit, you'll have to order that separately. But they are designed to happen in that way, and there are several of them throughout the pump. So the next thing we can do is take the gas ballast control and the inlet off here. So we take those two screws out with a 5mm Allen key. And with that removed, this whole thing will come off, including the handle, but it won't come past the black rubber knob on the top of the gas ballast. So you can just gently ease that off, it just pulls off. And now the whole thing will lift clear. So that's the handle, the clamping plate, and then the inlet will come off. Again, there's a dried out O-ring underneath there. It comes off, and inside there is a little strainer which just pops out. It's not held in by anything. So those can come out, and then the gas ballast, which is a similar arrangement with an O-ring underneath. And there's a felt in there, just as a silencer really. This one's very clean. I think from time to time they get included in the kit, not always sure. You do want it in there, so I wouldn't throw it away at this stage, that's for sure. So that's those removed. Now I can turn the pump back up, and there are 4 bolts here that hold the oil box onto the adapter plate. So that's the next thing that we want to remove. Let's see how tight they are. Not so bad. So we'll get those out. With those removed, the oil box will separate from the pump. Oh no, it won't. They're usually very stuck on. Again, there's a rubber O-ring seal there that will be fairly bonded in. Simplest way to do this is gently tap again. It's aluminium, don't welly on it. This is a rubber coated mallet. So a rubber mallet or something like that. Just a couple of taps and that will release the pump from the oil box. So our oil box is looking pretty clean. That can get washed out and prepared, which leaves us with the pump mechanism on this adapter plate. So that's the O-ring sealing round there, which we can move out of the way. That again will get replaced. I do like O-ring sealed oil boxes generally. A bit more forgiving than the printed gaskets or cork gaskets that you see on a lot of pumps, which are really, one use and throw away. The O-ring ones are a bit more forgiving. So to remove the rest of this, I've got a lip on the edge of this bench. If you didn't have a lip there, you could sit this down with the feet hanging over the edge, which would make life easier, but I can't do that. So we need to take the cartridge apart now. There are 3 screws in this end plate. Again, with a screwdriver we can take those out. You could remove the cartridge from the adapter at this stage, but I do find it's a little bit easier to get these undone while it's still attached to the extra mass. It does mean you've got something to hold on to that isn't already slippery with oil. Quick tap on those just releases the threads. So with those 3 screws out of the way, this plate is now free to move. As with everything else, it's going to be a little bit sticky, a little bit tricky. There's an overhang here. There we go. Quick tap and off it comes. I'm just going to take a look at the inside surface of that. You can see a bit of wear there, but it's not dug in. So I'm happy with that. Underneath there you can see the oil pump consists of these 2 plastic vanes in there. I'm not going to try and dig that out now because you're going to scratch things with a pick trying to pull that apart. It'll come apart easily. Just wanted the end plate off just because of undoing those 3 screws. So the next thing to do to take the next part off, these 2 bolts, which require a 4mm Allen key. You undo those and then they're all that's holding the cartridge onto the adapter plate. Just release those and wind them out. Now this is a single stage pump. Most lab pumps are 2-stage. This is a single stage. There are 2-stage versions of this pump. So this is a relatively simple one. As and when a pump comes in, I'll do a video on a 2-stage just so you can see the differences, but essentially very, very similar construction. So those 2 bolts come out. Now these 2 bolts have Doughty seals underneath them that provide a vacuum seal. These are usually very tricky to get out, but that one has come. So there's a seal under there. These Doughty seals, I'm sure you're familiar. It's a rubber seal with a metal bonded to it around the outside so that the seal can't go anywhere as it's compressed. It will stay there. Those will be in the kit and those should be replaced. So we'll poke those out. If they don't come out at this stage, if you're struggling to get them out, then that's fine. Just leave them there. And when the pump's cleaned with solvent, that will release them and they'll come out much more easily. But those are fine, they've come out, they're out of the way. So now this whole pump mechanism is free to be removed. So I'm going to grab hold of it and give it a wriggle and see if it'll come off. And then I'm going to not be surprised at all when it doesn't. So back to my trusty mallet. I can just tap. Everything's fallen apart. It's lively this morning. Okay, so what did we get out of there? We got a stator, we got our rotor with our vanes, which have springs in them. So there's one spring that stayed in there. Got very sticky oil. I think this has used a different oil than we would normally have in there. And then there's another one of those plastic couplings there, which is connecting the drive from this rotor into the oil pump rotor. Then we have an end plate, which is a separate part here. That's going to need to be removed. So let's do that. There is just enough give. There's a bit of relief between this lip and the position of the plate itself. So you can put that flat down there and you can see the back end of it there now. I have a very old seal driver which just happens to be the right size for Vacuubrand pumps. So this one is maintained just for Vacuubrand pumps. If I sit that onto the centre of the piece we're removing, give it a tap, that should have released it. It won't go all the way through because, as I say, it's going to hit the bench. But that should be enough that I can just push it through now. Nearly. It's gone a bit cross-eyed in there. There we go. So that's the end plate. A whole load of O-rings on there. There's a lot of O-rings in these Vacuubrand pumps. There's another one that seals that into the adapter. So we'll just lift that free. Remove that. And then there are a couple of smaller ones. There's one here that the gas ballast runs through. Smaller O-rings are always trickier to remove. Pop that out of there. There's a very small one over here for the oil way. That's a tiny O-ring. And then there's one more large one, because each face in the Vacuubrand pump is O-ring sealed. Many pumps don't have O-rings in these positions, but this one does. And then finally there is a shaft seal, a very small, it's only a 3mm deep shaft seal, which is our inner shaft seal. So that is going to want to come out, and I will attempt to do that with an even smaller screwdriver. Same deal, I just want to go in under the seal there, make sure that I've got the back of the seal, push it through, twist, just turn it a bit, work it round. Go slowly, and there it goes. So let's pop that out. See, that's a very small shaft seal. What you don't want to do is gouge deeply into this metal surface, because this has got to be reused. So if that seal is much more difficult to get out than that, stop and have a think, and again running it through solvent, heating the part up a little bit, all of these things that you'd normally do will work. Gradually release it and take it out. That's our end plate. That's everything off our adapter now, barring a few seals inside here. So there's an O-ring there that seals the intake port, and then underneath that, that gas ballast port, and then underneath there, this is the gas ballast non-return valve. It's a rubber star shape, just sits there. It will allow air to travel in one direction, and it will seal up and stop oil going back in the opposite direction when the gas ballast is turned off. It's a bit grubby, but it's not in bad condition at all, this pump. So that can be put to one side for cleaning. Then our rotor we've already looked at. It's a simple machined piece. These surfaces are very critical, so you want to look after that. We had a lively moment there where it popped across the bench. That won't have done it any harm, but if it had hit the floor, then we might have been looking at some damage. Pair of vanes, as I say, it's a single stage pump, so there's only 2 vanes in this pump, but those will be reused. The springs, they're in good condition. They can be washed out, and if they look good once they're cleaned, they'll go back in as well. And then we've got the rest of our pump cartridge. So back to the screwdriver, onto here, and whip that screw out. This is actually holding the exhaust valve of the pump itself. So underneath there we have a valve pad, a rubber pad, and a spring. That's our exhaust valve. And then this is this collects the oil as it sprays out and just keeps a film of oil over the valve. Can't immediately remember what the actual name that Vacuubrand uses for that is, but it's a similar idea that you see in other pumps. It's an internal separator or something of that nature, if you need to look it up, but again that's a reusable part that will get washed out. And then we can separate the oil pump stage here from the main stator, and again I'll go back to my tool because these are going to be pretty well stuck together. If you really have to, you can put a blade, larger blade than this, you can put a blade against this edge and tap there, but I have seen these actually crack. If the pump's older and it's been used for a long time, then you can actually crack the casting there because it is quite thin. Better way to do it is to put a seal driver down through the bore so that it sits inside there, and then holding onto the stator, give that a few taps and that'll separate them out. And again, it's just down to the O-ring that's stuck. So we've got an O-ring comes out there, another one of those very tiny ones can come out of there. Check both ends. Sometimes the O-rings stick on this end rather than in the groove on the opposite face, but that's all good. And then we've still got our oil pump rotor in here, but I've now got access to just pop it through. Just push my finger through the hole and that'll take that out, and then the vanes will just lift out of there. Whoop. Getting a bit oily now. And that's the oil pump rotor removed. The plate that we first took off here, as I said, has an O-ring underneath it. It's a very fine O-ring. I think it's only something like 1 millimetre in section. So that needs to come out and be replaced. The Doughty seals we've already taken out. There is another shaft seal down in here, so that will need to be popped out if it's going to be replaced. If your pump's in good condition like this, just have a feel of that shaft seal. This one is nice and soft. This one is less critical in terms of the final vacuum performance than the one that we had here. So oftentimes you can actually leave that in there. And then up on the top here, you do need to take this arrangement off. This is the oil pressure regulating valve. So there's a couple of flats on there to just lock into, and then that should come off. This one of course is super tight, and I'm wishing that I'd removed it while the pump was still all put together, but it didn't, so here we go. There we go. Once you break that free, it'll come off easily. And then within that, there is a valve with a small rubber pad in the centre of it. That's the actual seal, and there's a spring on top. So when sufficient oil pressure is reached, that centre point there is sitting under that pad. When there's excess oil pressure, it will just lift that up and allow the oil to flow away. So that's regulating your oil pressure in there. Now again, the pad in the centre there is not part of the minor kit. I think it does come in the more major kit for the pump, but that doesn't need to be replaced every time. If it looks chewed up, if there's a deep impression in the middle of it, then you would pick that out. But this one is smooth and flat and reusable, so that can stay. There's also a restrictor here. This restrictor allows a small amount of air to mix with the oil, aerating the oil and helping to clean it as it goes through the pump. That restrictor, again, is in the major kit but not in the minor. What I would do at this stage is to grab a can of aerosol solvent, put it up against the restrictor there and blow it through, and what I want to see is the solvent coming through that small cut hole down there. So that's what I'm looking for, and indeed it is. So that means that the restrictor's not blocked, there's airflow through there, so that doesn't need to be removed on this pump. It'll get cleaned out when the pump's washed. It'll go through an ultrasonic tank, so it'll get thoroughly cleaned, but I already know that that's not blocked, so I don't need to replace that on this pump. So that's all the parts stripped down. Like I say, slightly simpler because it's a single stage pump here, but you would really only have doubled up on the stator and the rotor there. Everything else in terms of how they're sectioned together is exactly the same. So this will all go away, get thoroughly cleaned up, and then I'll come back and show you reassembly. So we're back for the rebuild of this pump. Everything's been ultrasonically cleaned, polished where necessary. We're all good to go back together. There's a few things to say about kits for these pumps. There are a couple of kits. There's a seals kit and there's a full maintenance kit. If you go for the full maintenance kit, then you will get a few parts that you don't need that are for different variants of the pump. This particular plunger and spring is for an old variant of the oil dump valve. Won't apply to this pump, but that will come in the kit. The kit will also have your replacement springs, valve pads, bits and pieces like that. Felts for underneath, the felt pads are in there. pretty much everything that you need for a rebuild. That's what I would usually go with. There is a lesser kit, the seals kit, which doesn't come with the O-ring for the oil box, for example, so you would need to be reusing that. Now in this instant, this one's in really good condition, that could be reused. Often they can't. It also doesn't come with any shaft seals. Now, like I mentioned, taking it apart, the shaft seal in the oil pump on this one is very good. I'm not going to replace that. This is the shaft seal that I took out from the end plate. This again is very good. I'm not going to reuse this one because I've taken it out. I might as well put a new one in, but that wouldn't come in the kit. Likewise, the outer shaft seal wouldn't. Personally, I'd never rebuild a pump without replacing the outer shaft seal. That's where leaks come from, and that's probably the part that needs replacing more frequently than anything else. So I would always put a new one in, and I actually have loads of them. If you buy the full kit, then the outer shaft seal will come with it, and it will come preloaded in a new carrier. So you literally just screw that in. If you're going to fit one, it's relatively straightforward. You take the new seal and the carrier that you took the old seal out of. You can start that by hand, and then once it's level, just take a regular seal driver. I tend to go oversized to begin with, so that the seal driver will actually come down onto the metal surface. That means I know the seal is going in true and flat, and then you can flip the driver over, tap it down the rest of the way. So that's how you prepare that part. If you're doing it the way that I would normally do it, if you've got that full kit, then it will come ready to screw in. So that's just a few things to be aware of when choosing the kit that you buy. If you go for the full maintenance kit, absolutely everything will be there. So, reconstruction of this pump is slightly different to most other pumps, and that is down to this matter of it not having a regular flanged on motor. So the first thing we've got to do is rebuild the motor, and then the pump will be built onto that assembly. It's a common enough practice to actually build pumps in that direction, if you like. A lot of the smaller pumps are actually easier to build motor first and then build the pump onto it. There's no one right or wrong way. I would tend to look to build the cartridge of the pump first, because you can then manually check its operation and that it's running smoothly. But doing it in this way is a must for the Vacuubrand pumps. So the first thing I'm going to put in there is my new shaft seal. I didn't say when talking about kits that you will also get all of the O-rings that are required, all the little loose seals like that. So this is what we're going to be using as we rebuild. So that's the first one I need. That goes around the shaft seal carrier. And then the carrier drops into position. Sometimes that O-ring can be a little bit loose and might fall off, in which case a tiny smear of oil is just enough to retain it while you get it into position. The surface tension of the oil will do the job for you. And there are 3 screws that hold that in place. And we'll tighten those down. Don't have to welly on these, the O-ring is doing the sealing for you, so that's enough on there. Then our plastic plate goes back in. I'm reusing the O-ring that's on there. Again, the major kit will have a new O-ring. They're a devil to fit because they tend to fall off and drop into the hole. This one's already, as you can see, coming loose. Just got to, there we go, work that in until it sits down properly. You have got a gap here where the felt pads will sit, so you can always look through there if you're not sure that that's sat right. Next thing we need is the motor body itself. So that will lower on. You have got exposed windings, so you want to be careful with this so you don't catch anything, and then you can roughly eyeball where it sits. I don't know how well you can see it, but because of the way they're painted in the factory, you can just line it up with the gaps in the paintwork. What I should have done is clean a bit more of this muck out before bolting it up. So with that roughly aligned, next part that goes on is the ironwork, and you can see I've polished out the coupling there. That coupling is a replaceable part. If you have got any deep scoring in here, it is possible to pull this off and replace it with a new one. Again, it's a bit of a tricky job, but it can be done if necessary. And then we're just going to lower this all the way in. It's going to go through that new shaft seal we've just put in, so I'm going to put a little bit of oil around the tip there just to help it ease through, and then lower it down straight through the middle. Feel for the shaft seal when it gets there, just make sure it drops through nicely, and then this cap can be then rotated so that the holes line up for the tie rods, and the 3 tie rods can drop through. And then back to our special tool. Let me tighten these down. I'm going to do them one by one, just a little bit on each, rather than tightening one all the way down. Because what they'll do is they pull the motor in, they'll finish the alignment job for us. So just working around a few turns at a time, it'll pull everything together. Once those are all down, we can put the fan cover over there, and we'll be able to flip the pump over and work on the inside. So that's there, and that now will rotate because it's got the bearing added to the other end. Quickly knock a bit of dust out of that. And that sits back on. It doesn't matter about the orientation, but you usually find that one end or one area of this will have been whacked on the floor quite a few times and the paint will be gone. This one doesn't seem to be, but put it back the way it went on, or the way it came off rather, then it'll hide the paint damage on the bottom. No, it doesn't that want to get in there. It goes. So there's 3 of these little screws. We'll attach that. None of which seem to want to go back in. Not quite sure why that's fighting me so much. Not normally one of the more difficult jobs on rebuilding a pump. But it is today. This will be a candidate for speeding the film up, won't it? This just doesn't fit. We got there in the end. I have never known a fan cover be that difficult to fit. That takes me back a bit, really. Okay, fan cover's finally in place. So the whole thing can be turned over and can sit on the fan cover. Now the cover itself, as I say, is plastic, so we don't want to bang this down on the bench and risk cracking that. But we need to get it that way up so that we can start to rebuild the rest of it. As this goes together, assembly oil is going to leak out from the inlet port of the pump. There's no way to avoid that, but what I can do is just put a bit of rag up in there to catch it as it comes, which will help. It won't eliminate it altogether, but we'll get a bit of a leak there. So we're going to then build up the rest of the pump onto there. So the first section to go in is this end plate. This is the one that I took the shaft seal out of. So I'm going to put a new shaft seal into that. Same basic technique. These are very, very thin, fine shaft seals, so you get it roughly lined up by hand. You won't be able to push this in because it's a metal outer. And then take a suitably sized driver and the associated handle, and then we're just going to drive that down. It's literally a case of putting that on top, getting it leveled off as much as possible and giving it a few taps. I'm going to put it on my other bench over here, so it will be off camera, but if I bang it down on the main bench there, then everything's going to go flying. So there we go, 3 taps and that's down, seated nicely. Then onto the back of here and onto the face here, there are a few extra O-rings that we need to put in. So the first one, the one that I forget most often of all, is the gas ballast star. So that little black rubber star sits down in there as our non-return. And then there's a seal that goes around that, which is not that one. That one's too big. So it's that one there. And that will sit into its recess there. Occasionally you'll find they're a little bit tight and you need to just gently stretch the O-ring a bit by hand before putting it in. And then the first of our large O-rings that sit round again in that groove there. These ones often, as you can see here, don't quite want to sit down. See, that's popping back out. Now this is a very fine, I think this is 1.5 mil section, this O-ring. So if you pull hard on it, it's going to snap. So just a gentle stretch, just to get it to sit in. And then once those are in, I'm going to wipe a bit of vacuum oil right the way over that surface. You need plenty of lubrication while you're assembling these things. And then there's one more which seals between the plate and the shaft area there, but I'm going to apply that onto here because it makes it a nice fit. So that sits down on there, and then again plenty of lubrication right the way over the back of that. You can use a brush or whatever. I use my finger. I don't have any problem with any allergy related to oil, so I'm okay. And then that's going to drop into there. Now to get it aligned properly, I'm going to take one of the long bolts that goes all the way through the pump assembly, drop it through the hole, and then just give it 2 or 3 turns. Certainly doesn't need to be tight, but it just means that as this drops into place, I know that it's properly aligned with the hole, because it's difficult to turn this once it's in place. And I'll repeat that with each section that I fit. I'll do the same thing, drop the bolts in, just to make sure that it's lined up. Then we can go for the next set of O-rings. So we've got these very, very small ones. I think these are about 5 by 1, 5.1.5, something like that. That sits in there. And then there's one for over there. And then another of these, which again I'm going to just give a very gentle stretch to before dropping it in. And then back in with the oil. Plenty of oil all the way over there. That'll hold everything together as well as lubricating. And then also just make sure that there's a wipe of oil onto the coupling there, and a reasonable dollop down inside. And then we can go for the first of our plastic cross couplings, these pieces here. These again, these are the original ones, they've been cleaned up. They won't come, even if you get the big kit, you won't get cross couplings. They would have to be ordered separately if you've got one that's broken. So that sits down in there, and then the rotor will go onto that. The rotor is symmetrical. Doesn't matter which way around it goes on particularly. You can still see here that there is a little bit of a marking there from the original shaft seal. It's not grooved in particularly. I'm going to put it on the other way round, just use the fresh face. So that will drop down in there, and then it has to orientate with the cross coupling. So I looked first to see which way around it should go, and then gently push it on. If it is off centre and it catches on that, you can damage the coupling itself. So once that's on, a little bit of a turn just to make sure everything's good, and that's now turning everything all the way through the motor as well. Okay, so we've got a pair of vanes all cleaned up and ready to go, which need springs. Still too many bits in my little pot there. So the springs sit down in the holes. These don't have any orientation to them. There are no cutouts for oil flow or anything like that. They go straight in. Again, good dose of oil on there. Slide them in. They do have a habit of catching. You could install them into the rotor before putting the rotor on there, but that means you then have to hold a few more pieces together while you did it. I find they go on fine like that. Put them through, just make sure they're moving freely, which they are. And then we can put the stator around that whole assembly. So that goes like that. The valve port obviously at the top. So I'm going to take the bolt out. See, I would call that a bolt because it has a plain shaft. Drop it through there, and then we're going to do the same thing. You do need to squeeze the vanes together just until they're inside of the stator. Then get the bolt aligned, and then before dropping this all the way down, just a few turns on there, and then the whole thing will drop into place, and it should look even all the way around with no gaps to one side or the other. That lets us know it's aligned. Let's repeat the process. So we have a little O-ring there. We don't have an O-ring over here now because it's the end of the path. There's me forgetting that this is a single stage pump. So if you had the two-stage version, you would have a centre bearing plate going on here and then another stator going on top. Repeat the steps, it's the same process. And then once again, that's a little tight. A gentle stretch to bring that out. Sit that in. And then, so soon, we're at the oil pump section. So slightly different here. Again, I'm going to use the bolts, but the bolts actually, as they go through here, have to have those doughty seals applied to them. So we're going to do that now. So take that out. That's a doughty seal. That goes on there. And then the other bolt will also get the same. And I can drop both of those through the plate, line them up and lower the whole thing down. That should, there we go, line up all the way through. And then I can turn to my Allen key, just wind those down. That one hasn't lined up. Okay, just a very slight rotation of the whole assembly. And they're in. Now you don't need to go tight on these, especially at this stage. Just want it to go down evenly. So working side to side, and when that starts to feel tight, what I'm going to do to check that everything is still moving nicely, take a large blade screwdriver, and you can see down in the bottom there is the slot that the next of the cross couplings are going to go into. I'm just going to use that very gently to be able to rotate the pump. And I can already hear that that's starting to pump. So a little bit more tension in there. You want it to be even. I only do it by hand. Don't use torque wrenches. I don't think there's even a torque figure for these. Everything's O-ring sealed. The bolts are doughty sealed. So we're going to have a good seal. What you don't want to do is over tighten it to the point where the pump won't rotate anymore. So just checking that all is good. It's worth saying at this point, as you rebuild, it's best practice to only rotate the pump in the direction that it normally travels, which in this instance, with the inlet being here, the pump is rotating in that direction, anti-clockwise as I look down on it from here. Most pumps will tolerate being rotated in the opposite direction. Sometimes though, you will get blades catching, and you can do a bit of damage, so just keep it going in the right direction. So the next thing going in here, we just continue building up. We've got another cross coupling that's going to sit down in there. So place that in, and then the oil pump rotor will go next. I want to make sure that I've got plenty of oil in this whole assembly. Obviously any excess will just get pushed out as soon as the pump starts to move. So again, lining up with the cross coupling, that rotor, sit down in there, gently push it home, feeling for the cross coupling as you go. I put really a lot of oil in there, so it's pushing back. I'll make it happen. Oil pump vanes slot in quite easily there. The notches in the middle obviously fit over each other. So we'll get that down in there. Push out a bit more of the oil. Use it to give a good smear over there. And there's a very thin O-ring that goes around there. Which is so thin that you would rarely need to stretch that. I would really try to avoid having to stretch that because it's almost certainly going to snap in your fingers. So there we go. And then the cover goes on. The bolt holes in the cover are machined so that they can only go on in one direction. The inside face of this one is completely plain, so it wouldn't actually make any difference. But some of the older models did have an additional machining on the inside face that had to be orientated in the right position, which is why they've just historically retained the pokey-okey hole design. And I've got 3 little screws to do that. They're going in a lot easier than the ones for the fan cover did, aren't they? And again, they'll orient, they're countersunk, so they'll orient the position of the plate as well as they go in. So there we go. That's the cartridge rebuilt, effectively. We then have the exhaust valve, which is valve and spring, and sits into this diffuser or whatever we're choosing to call it today. And we screw that back into place. Don't go too tight on that. Again, this is a plastic part, and after many years of use and heat cycling, it will get kind of brittle. So you want to avoid overreaching yourself, tightening that up. Then the oil pressure relief plunger, spring and body. There's no O-ring on here. Again, going back to earlier models, they did have an O-ring seal on here, but the later ones don't. In order to get this into there, what I do is push down, grip it momentarily by the plunger itself to keep it retained just while you get that thread started. And wind that up, and then I'm just going to nip it up, not really yanking on that, just nip it up into place. And there we go. That is pretty much the interior of this pump built. It seems too easy, having only one stage. Why don't we make all pumps like that? So there, we've got the pump built. What we now need to do is put the new O-ring on for the oil box. Stretch that into place, make sure it's tucked down, and then the bolts actually go in from the underside here, so it's easier to bring the oil box over, turn the pump over and drop it into place. So I'm going to take that rag out there at this stage, turn the whole thing over, sort my hands out, and then lower it into place. And then just check by eye all the way round, make sure it's sat down. If the O-rings come out or gets caught anywhere, then you should be able to see a gap where it hasn't sat in properly. Then the 4 screws that hold that down. You get confused about the screws. The painted ones, the ones with painted heads, are going to be for this. The other ones that look very similar but don't have paint on them are for the inlet plate. So that's those in. And I just need my extended ball-ended Allen key to wind those down. What I want to feel is that all of these go down smoothly and happily. If there's any binding, you need to stop immediately, because these are stainless steel screws going into aluminium threads, so if anything's wrong, if they cross over or anything, it's the expensive aluminium part that's going to get damaged and not the cheap screw. So you really want to avoid that. And again, I'm not wellying down on these. That O-ring is doing the sealing work, so these are really, they're just providing compression on the O-ring so it can seal. And that's all they need to do. That's all as tight as they need to be. So hey, it's looking like a pump again, isn't it? Get rid of a little bit of assembly oil from the bench, and then we can put it back on its feet. Now, the felt pads, which go, give you that, tilt that over, felt pads sit in there. You can fit them now, you can fit them later. I'm going to put them in now because I'm pretty confident with this pump. It was in very good condition. If you've got anything that makes you think that the shaft seal might leak, then I would leave the felt pads out, leave this cover off, test the pump first. If it's going to leak, then it isn't leaking through your felt pads. You can find out quickly that it's leaking, sort it out. But the shafts in here look very, very good, so I think we're going to be absolutely fine on this occasion. So those screws can go in. And that will be the bottom side of this pump dealt with then. Get those up onto those shake-proof washers. And we can put it on its feet. There's a few more things just to finish off. The fill and drain ports for the pump, they're identical. Fill and drain are the same on this. So they get new O-rings. This is my fill port. I need a 6mm Allen key. I'm not going to worry about tightening that in just now because I haven't put any oil in it yet, have I? And then the drain port, which is down here, exactly the same. But that one I can tighten off. Again, it's O-ring sealed, doesn't need to be tight, that's enough. This port here is where the exhaust would go, it's where on this filter is going to fit, but I'm not including that as part of this video, so just left that to one side and I'll leave that open for now. And then finally our inlet and our gas ballast. So that's the gas ballast assembly. I took the felt out of it so that I could clean it, so the felt can go back in. Looks like I might have inadvertently put a new one in there for them. That's very kind of me. And then that picks up its O-ring, sits there. The orientation of this matters insofar as when the black cover goes on, there's an arrow. When it's pointing towards the pump, it indicates that gas ballast is on. When it's turned away, it indicates that it's off. And on the side there is a hole, and that hole is what lets the air through. So the hole in here needs to line up. So that faces that way. The inlet port will just sit on there. And then this plate goes across the top with the handle. So the handle just slots in, and then that whole thing drops over the ports. And then finish that off with a couple of screws and a 5mm Allen key. And this one in particular, you don't want to go tight on this. What will happen if you go too tight on these is the centre will be pulled down and the outside edges will lift up to compensate, and you'll actually start to get leaks through the outside because you tighten it up more than was necessary. So again, just give that a tweak so that it's tight down. Then the gas ballast cover knob thing can sit on there. I'm going to turn that to the closed position, and the inlet strainer drops into there. And that's it, everything's back together. The rest of the bits, you'll see there's a few O-rings left over. If this was a two-stage pump, obviously, I would have used up the rest of those as well. So that's the Vacuubrand RZ6 pump. Everything you've seen applies to the 2.5 as well. It's very, very similar inside, and the assembly and operation is much the same. So I'll get this over the test bench, put some oil in it, give it a run, and I'll tack something on the end to tell you how it got on. Thanks a lot. So here's our Vacuubrand RZ6 pump on the test bench. Worth noting, if you look down here at the sight glass, you see that's foamy oil. That's normal for these pumps. That little air bleed that we looked at inside the pump actually causes the aeration of the oil. And when you first start up with new oil, you're going to get that foaming as the air comes out of the oil. After a while, once the pump warms up and the oil is fully de-aerated, that will settle out and the foaming will go away, and you'll see clear oil like you would with most other pumps. So don't panic when you see that. It's just because you put new oil in that needs to out gas. So I'll come back in a few moments when this has had a chance to run for a little bit longer. It's down at 1.2 times 10 to the minus 2. The end plate on the pump tells me that this single stage pump is spec'd at 1 times 10 to the minus 1. So we're very, very close to spec, but I need to give it an hour or so of running just to make sure I'm happy. And there we go, about half an hour later now. The aeration of the oil has stopped, that's settled out now. And we're down at 4.7 10 to the minus 2, so well exceeding the spec of the pump. And that's our Vacuubrand RZ6 all ready for the customer. Thanks for watching. If I can help, do get in touch, and like and subscribe if you found something useful. Cheers.